A new earthquake measuring 7.4 on the Richter scale was recorded off the coast of Kamchatka on September 13th. A tsunami warning was not necessary in the region in the first few hours, but the tremor was felt in coastal settlements and the possibility of aftershocks remained. Initial reports indicated power outages, disabled base stations, and road cracks in several areas. Cargo operations at the docks in Avacha Bay were halted, and port authorities moved tugboats to secure mooring points. Regional administrations closed schools, and rapid damage assessment teams were deployed to public buildings. Departures at Yelizovo Airport were temporarily suspended, while teams inspected the runway for surface cracks. Low-lying areas along the coastline were evacuated as a precaution. Official sources reported no casualties as of the morning hours. This picture emphasized the fact that the 7.4 tremor may not have been an isolated event, but part of a series. Initial reports from authorities indicated no major damage, but this earthquake was overshadowed by the historic 8.8 tremor that struck the same region on July 30th. This is because satellite photos taken at the end of the summer indicated that some infrastructure elements at the Vilyuchinsk/Rybachiy nuclear submarine base, considered the backbone of the Pacific Fleet, had been affected. The September 13th tremor represented a new wave of stress that could potentially strain those weak points. While the airbase and port facilities in the region were striving to return to normal, it became clear that the seismic fault line remained active. Thus, the critical question of the day was, how much could the nuclear submarine ecosystem in Kamchatka have been affected by this new shock, structurally or operationally? The answer to this question is decisive not only for the maritime situation in the Pacific, but also for the Kremlin's strategic agenda and the attention resource budget it can allocate to the European arena. First, the function of the base in Kamchatka, which is likely to be affected by the earthquake, is critically important. The Vilyuchinsk-Rybachiy complex in Kamchatka is a strategic submarine base for Russia's Pacific Fleet. This is where Bory-class SSBNs carrying ballistic missiles and attack submarines carrying cruise missiles are housed, maintained, refueled, and undergo potential missile loading and deployment planning. The air component in the region is represented by the Yelizovo Air Base. It is critical in the Pacific, both in terms of patrol and early warning support. This picture makes Kamchatka not just a geographical outpost, but a hub that keeps the naval leg of Russia's nuclear triad afloat. Therefore, every tremor in the field is directly linked to the pace of strategic deterrence. This is why reports of detachment-type findings in the floating pier element after the 8.8 magnitude earthquake in the summer resonated. If the 7.4 magnitude shock on September 13th came before the repair/improvement process was completed, a second impact effect at the patched points is a possibility. This is why the Kremlin is nervous, even though it is not in mortal danger. The safety of nuclear submarines cannot be reduced to the dilemma of whether a reactor leaked. The real risk lies in disruptions to technical and operational continuity. For example, micro-damage and misalignment in coastal power distribution, cable galleries, pier stability elements, floating dock connections, or closed units where ammunition safety protocols are established can impose months of restricted operation. SLBM loading/unloading equipment has precise tolerances. Millimeters matter. Similarly, if the breakwater, barriers, and current patterns within the port are disrupted, the maneuvering margin within the pier narrows. This means a decrease in the launch-deploy-return cycle, longer maintenance and refueling intervals, restricted deployment periods, and ultimately, a decline in deterrence tempo. Such a scenario creates a double problem for the Kremlin. The need to instill confidence that strategic capabilities are fully intact internally, and the concern not to show weaknesses to rivals externally. The September 13th tremor renewed this psychological and technical pressure. So, can we say that damage has definitely occurred at this base in the earthquake's area of impact, which has the potential to drive Putin crazy with doubt and anxiety? In such situations, a three-tier verification scheme is used. First, even if the port's AIS is turned off, high-resolution optical/synthetic aperture radar (SAR) satellite images are used to search for pier geometry, the alignment of floating/fixed structures, new buoy/barrier additions, and the presence of emergency repair ships/dry docks. Second, any deviation from the usual open sea patrol routine is monitored. SSBN circuits cannot be read directly, but the pier occupation pattern, tugboat activity, and the rhythm of supply tankers provide clues. Third, Differences in tone in the post-shake management news flow between local civil administration and central authority are evaluated. In the past earthquake, minor tensions in the Kamchatka administration center line were reflected in the press, and there were discussions about response time and responsibility. Whether or not such a tension is present this time will become clear quickly, because communication is already more cautious in places where strategic facilities are located. This triple test set serves to examine the nuclear facility risk discourse rationally, without exaggerating or downplaying it. But what if something really did break in Kamchatka? What happens in the worst-case scenario? What is meant by broke here is not the reactor, but an infrastructural node such as the pier connection loading line. In such a case, the full repair process could take weeks or months. Alternative docks, spare floating pier modules, and temporary loading-unloading arrangements would come into play. This could limit the number of simultaneous in-port platforms and necessitate the transfer of some planned maintenance to other ports/shipyards. Strategic submarine rotations are replanned, with priority given to the most essential ones. The training and exercise dimension is reduced in an effort to maintain core deterrence. From the outside, this does not appear to be Russia backing down, but a minor decrease in frequency becomes meaningful when added to long-term trend data. So, could there be a radiological accident? We can say that this is possible, but has a low probability. For technical discipline, we cannot say zero. However, considering the 60 years of experience in port security protocols, the probability of a very serious accident in terms of reactor safety is low. The real agenda is continuity in operational safety. Indeed, at the end of the summer, there were no headlines about major disasters in the general assessments of the region. Concerns were more focused on the invisible fragilities of the strategic infrastructure. The September 13th earthquake tested these fragilities once again. This is not doom-mongering, but rather a call for rational risk management. It is true that there was no visible destruction, but at the same time, the pace of operations was disrupted. On the other hand, the nuclear dimension and safety protocols are also issues that require attention. Nuclear submarines are subject to multi-layered procedures in terms of reactor safety while in port, with automatic protection and scram procedures activated in the event of shocks. Therefore, the image of a leak that comes to mind for the public is not the first reflex under normal conditions. Most of the risk is related to infrastructure integrity. However, in radiological safety, port measurement networks, water-air-ground sensors, and on-site instant reporting mechanisms also play a pivotal role. After the 8.8 magnitude earthquake, the general message was that no major disaster had occurred. Yet questions regarding the strategic facility remained on the agenda. The 7.4 magnitude shock on September 13th requires a new round of full control by technical teams. Postponed exercises, short-term port stays, and an approach of avoiding unnecessary risk are seen as outcomes. On the other hand, the strategic submarine base entering a post-shake monitoring repair cycle affects Moscow's Pacific Europe priority ranking at the decision-making table. On one side are airspace crises centered on Poland, the increase in NATO air and naval presence on the Baltic North axis, and pressure on Kaliningrad. On the other side is the necessity to confidently maintain the rhythm of nuclear deterrence in the Pacific. Managing both with 100% focus and 100% resources is difficult, especially when it comes to SSBN operations, which require strategic silence. Therefore, after the September 13th shock, it is expected that the Kremlin's decision-making cycle will allocate more attention to the Pacific. A loud but measured response is preferred on the European front, while low-key but intense technical logistical activities are preferred in the Pacific. This means that Moscow's external reflexes could be modulated for several weeks or months. There are also operational implications for the Pacific Fleet. Issues such as deployment, replenishment, and training are at the forefront here. The fragility mentioned above could impose limitations in two main areas. First, deployment traffic is planned more conservatively. Submarines undergo longer pre-port tests, and each deployment is mandatory. Second, redundant operations are conducted at dock equipment and floating pier interfaces. This imposes limitations on the number of platforms that can be in port at the same time, maintenance area allocation, and loading capabilities. There is also flexibility in training and crew rotation, with some modules gaining prominence in simulators rather than at sea. This does not preclude the statement that deterrence continues on paper, but it is noticeable in rivals' operational tempo readings. As an extreme example, a small drop in the frequency schedule of SSBN cycles could lead to parameter changes in the surveillance interception concepts around PACOM. This new earthquake in Kamchatka may also trigger a search for signals at the regional country management level. After the major earthquake at the end of July, the reflexes of the civil local administration in Kamchatka were closely monitored by the center, and discussions on crisis management standards came to the fore. This type of friction between the center and the periphery is more sensitive around strategic facilities. Looking at the tone of communication between the regional administration and security units after the September 13th tremor, the line, "No panic, control continues," was preferred. This appears rational for two reasons. First, to avoid triggering panic among the population regarding evacuation and stockpiling. Second, to prevent unnecessary objective concentration around strategic facilities. However, during such periods, independent verification channels, namely satellites, commercial imaging, and civilian observation networks, also come into play more frequently. This balance will reveal the difference between what is seen and what is felt in the coming weeks. The question of whether Russia has any safe harbors left after this earthquake and the lesson of Novorossiysk may also come to the fore. Just as the assumptions of safe harbor in Russia's surface picture were resolved during the war in the Black Sea, the assumption that inner harbors are absolutely secure in the Pacific is being tested due to earthquakes. In the Novorossiysk example, surprise attack/damage windows could open even in areas considered safe at the port entrance. In Kamchatka, the issue is not attack, but nature. But the result is similar, in that it shows that the inner harbor is not absolutely safe. This lesson is applied more strictly in the nuclear submarine ecosystem. Full inspection after every shock, gradual normalization, conservative circuit. These three steps could mean a few weeks of lost capacity, and a language that is opaque but careful is needed for the perception of deterrence. So how will the Kremlin's communication strategy evolve after this earthquake? After the 8.8 magnitude earthquake in the summer, the official language conveyed the message that control is in our hands. The same line will likely be maintained after the September 13th tremor, but this time, the geopolitical noise in the media is more intense. While keeping technical notes in the Pacific as low-key as possible, the Kremlin may convey the message to European capitals that our strategic assets remain unaffected. This is the psychological component of military activity. It is also necessary for domestic politics because the maritime component of the nuclear triad serves as a national symbol. If the perception that something has happened spreads among the public, the impact of the harsh rhetoric in the European arena will also be broken. In this context, it is most sensible to interpret the September 13th tremor not as an isolated natural event, but as a stress test, measuring the resilience of the nuclear submarine infrastructure in Kamchatka for the second time. From the Kremlin's perspective, this is not merely a technical issue, but a matter of attention and resource allocation between Europe and the Pacific. The most likely scenario at this stage appears to be Moscow maintaining its harsh rhetoric, while adopting a more conservative profile on the ground and engaging in a quiet but intense marathon of repairs and inspections in the Pacific. Thank you for watching.